Good morning, class 12. Well, in continuation with the chapter Indian Economy on the eve of independence, where you all have studied the low level of economic development under the colonial rule and how our agriculture sector could not flourish. So, today let's study about the industrial sector under the British rule. Well, children, if I talk about industrial sector, then our industrial sector was also not allowed to flourish as in the case of agriculture. India was not allowed to develop an industrial base under the colonial rule. Rather, our famous handicraft industries also declined. And the reason why they didn't want it was the very first was that they wanted India to merely remain an exporter of important raw material which was needed for the production of finished goods in Britain. And secondly, they made India, rather they turned India into a market for the finished goods which were produced in Britain and sold in India. Now children, due to the decline of our handicraft industries, a huge number of the people they became unemployed in our country, and at the same time they were deprived of the supply of the locally made goods. Rather, they had to purchase the goods which were made in Britain and sold in Indian market. Now children, it was during the second half of the 19th century when the modern industry started taking root in our country. Though the progress was very slow, initially there were two major industries which were set up. One was cotton textile industry and another was jute mill. Now this cotton textile mill was limited towards the western part of our country, that is in Maharashtra and Gujarat, and jute mill was concentrated in Bengal. And with the passage of time, even the iron and steel industry began coming up in the 20th century, and the first mill was TISCO, that is Tata Iron Steel Company, which was set up in the year 1907 along with the other industries like sugar industry, cement industry, paper industry and so on. But the problem was there was hardly any capital goods industry. Capital goods industry means the industries which actually produce machineries. So, because of the capital goods industries which were not there in our country at that time, so the consumer industries could not be set up because it's capital good industry which produce machineries, and on those machineries only consumer goods could have been produced. So there was a very few setup of these industries in our country, and at the same time there was no replacement of the traditional handicraft industries. So that was the time, children, when the growth of our industrial sector did not contribute much towards our GDP, that is gross domestic product. And a major drawback of the new industrial sector was that it was limited in area of operation of the public sector. Now this sector remained confined only to the railways, power generation, communication, ports and some other departmental undertakings. So that was how the industrial base could not expand under the colonial rule. Now if we talk about the foreign trade, children, you all are familiar with the fact that since from ancient times, India always remained a very important trading center throughout the world. But with the coming of the Britishers and with their restrictive policies, the trade and the tariff, it was adversely affected. Where India was once used to earn a good amount through foreign trade, a time came when it was adversely affected and the volume of India's foreign trade also reduced. Rather, India became an exporter of primary products such as raw silk, cotton, wool, sugar, consumer goods, and we became an importer of finished consumer goods like cotton, silk, woolen, clothes, and capital goods. Now, for all the products, the Britain, they had made their monopoly. As a result, what happened that more than half of India's foreign trade was restricted to Britain, while very less was allowed with few other countries like Ceylon, China, Persia. And the most important feature of India's foreign trade throughout the British rule was the generation of large export surplus. Means that as Britishers, they made India mainly an exporter of the primary products, and due to which India earned a good amount of the export surplus. But children, this export surplus was at the cost of the country's economy, where several essential commodities like a kerosene oil, food grain, clothes, these were all very scarcely available. Rather, in a domestic market, other goods were available which was not required by the Indians. And do you know that this surplus export did not brought any gold and silver into India, but this export surplus money was rather used by the Britishers for making the payment for the expenses which was occurred by an office which was set up by the colonial government in Britain. They also used this export surplus for the expenses on war which was fought by the British government and the import of invisible items. Now, because of all these reasons, children, India's wealth was totally drained out from India to Britain. So, Britishers did not allow our foreign trade also to expand under the colonial rule, and the condition of a people under colonial rule was bad to worse.